The luxury shoe store buzzed with quiet elegance. Soft lighting reflected off polished marble floors, and the air carried the faint scent of leather and sophistication. The manager, Oliver, stood near the counter, his sharp suit tailored to perfection. He surveyed the store with an air of superiority, his eyes scanning the customers with a practiced gaze. To him, everyone was either a buyer worth his attention or a distraction not deserving of his time. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a woman entered, dressed in a simple trench coat with her hair loosely tied back. She walked with quiet confidence, her face partially obscured by sunglasses. Melania Trump, unrecognizable to most in her understated attire, began browsing the displays. Her fingers lightly grazed the shelves, admiring the craftsmanship of the shoes. Oliver noticed her immediately, his lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't fit the profile of his usual clientele. Her lack of flashy accessories or an entourage made him assume she wasn't worth much attention. With a quick glance at one of his sales associates, he muttered under his breath, "Keep an eye on her. She might just be here to waste our time." Melania, oblivious to the assumptions being made about her, continued looking at the shoes. She picked up a pair of sleek black stilettos, examining the fine stitching. A young saleswoman approached her hesitantly, offering a polite smile. "Can I help you with anything, ma'am?" she asked. Before Melania could respond, Oliver swooped in. "Don't bother," he said curtly, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of nearby customers. "She's clearly not buying anything." The comment hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Melania turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes narrowing slightly. "I was actually considering purchasing these," she said, holding up the shoes. Oliver smirked, his tone dripping with condescension. "These?" he said, gesturing toward the stilettos. "They're part of our exclusive collection. I doubt they're in your price range." The young saleswoman looked horrified, her face flushing with embarrassment. Nearby customers exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering to each other about the scene unfolding. Melania remained composed, placing the shoes back on the shelf. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said quietly, her voice steady but firm. Oliver crossed his arms, his smirk widening. "And you shouldn't waste the time of a store like this," he retorted. "We have real customers to attend to." Without another word, Melania nodded slightly and turned toward the door. She walked out with the same quiet grace she had entered, leaving behind a room filled with awkward silence. Oliver, feeling victorious, returned to the counter, muttering something about keeping standards high. But the moment wasn't over. The young saleswoman turned to a colleague, whispering nervously. "Did she look familiar to you?" she asked. I think she might have been someone important." Her colleague shrugged, dismissing the thought. If she was, she wouldn't have left so easily. Little did Oliver know, the woman he had just humiliated wasn't done with him yet. And when she returned, the tables would turn in a way he could never have imagined. The store settled back into its routine after Melania's quiet departure, but an undercurrent of unease lingered among the staff. The young saleswoman couldn't shake the feeling that the woman they had just dismissed wasn't an ordinary customer. She glanced nervously at Oliver, who was preoccupied with a new client, his confidence unshaken by the earlier incident. An hour later, the bell above the door chimed again. This time, the energy in the room shifted. Melania re-entered the store, but she was no longer dressed modestly. Instead, she wore an elegant designer coat, paired with sleek heels that exuded confidence. Her sunglasses were gone, revealing her unmistakable face. Accompanying her was a sharply dressed man with a clipboard, his presence immediately commanding attention. Oliver, who had been mid-conversation with another customer, froze as his eyes landed on her. His smirk vanished, replaced with a mixture of shock and confusion. He took a hesitant step forward, his usual bravado faltering. "Mrs. Trump," he stammered, the recognition hitting him like a thunderbolt. I didn't realize." Melania raised a hand, her calm but firm gesture silencing him instantly. The man with her stepped forward, speaking with authority. "Mrs. Trump is here on behalf of a partnership she has with this brand. She was conducting an unannounced visit to evaluate the customer experience." Oliver's face turned pale, and a hush fell over the room. The staff exchanged wide-eyed glances, their disbelief mirrored by the few customers who had remained in the store. The man continued, his tone unrelenting. "Unfortunately, it seems the experience provided was far below the standards we expect." Melania turned her gaze to Oliver, her expression unreadable, but heavy with meaning. "You were quick to judge," she said, her voice measured. "You assumed that, because I wasn't dressed the way you expected, I didn't belong here. That kind of arrogance doesn't just hurt your business. It shows a lack of character." Oliver tried to respond, his words catching in his throat. I had no idea who you were," he managed to say, his tone desperate. Melania tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unshaken. "And if you had?" she asked. "Would you have treated me differently? Or do you only respect those you think are important?" The question hung in the air, sharp and piercing. Oliver lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. The customers and staff watched in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. The man with the clipboard stepped forward again. "The brand will be reviewing your actions and their impact on our reputation," he said firmly. "Expect a formal follow-up." Melania turned to leave, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. At the door, she paused and glanced back. Her voice was calm, but her words carried a quiet power. "Respect shouldn't be reserved for the people you recognize. It should be given to everyone." With that, she exited, leaving behind a room steeped in stunned silence. Oliver stood frozen, his confidence shattered. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, the realization of what had just transpired, leaving a lasting impression. As the door closed behind Melania, the young saleswoman whispered to her colleague, "I knew she looked familiar." Her colleague nodded silently, both of them realizing they had just witnessed something they would never forget. As the door closed behind Melania, the store erupted into whispers and murmurs. The staff, who had been silently watching the confrontation, exchanged nervous glances. Customers leaned toward each other, their voices low but filled with curiosity. The young saleswoman, still standing near the counter, felt a mix of vindication and anxiety. She had known something was off from the start, but now the stakes had risen far beyond what she could have imagined. Oliver, meanwhile, stood frozen in place, his usually confident demeanor shattered. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. The weight of Melania's words bore down on him, each one replaying in his mind. He turned to the man with the clipboard, who was still standing near the entrance, his expression unreadable. Is this going to cost me my job?" Oliver stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The man raised an eyebrow, his tone cold. "That depends," he said. "The brand doesn't tolerate behavior that tarnishes its reputation. But what happens next is out of my hands." Oliver nodded weakly, his confidence completely eroded. For the first time, he realized how his arrogance and prejudice had blinded him, and now the consequences were far beyond what he had ever expected. The young saleswoman took a hesitant step forward, her voice timid. "Excuse me," she said softly. Is there anything we can do to fix this?" The man with the clipboard turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "It's not about fixing this moment," he said. "It's about ensuring it never happens again. Respect is the foundation of any business. Without it, everything else falls apart." The words lingered in the air, striking a chord not just with the staff, but also with the customers still present. The store felt different now, the atmosphere heavier, as if the very foundation of its polished image had been shaken. Hours later, as the store prepared to close, Oliver called the staff together. His usual commanding presence was gone, replaced by a subdued humility. "I don't have an excuse for what happened today," he began, his voice quiet. "But I've learned something I should have known all along. Judging someone by how they look, or assuming their worth based on appearances, is not just wrong. It's destructive." The staff listened in silence, their faces a mix of understanding and skepticism. The young saleswoman, however, nodded slowly, recognizing the sincerity in his tone. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Oliver continued, his gaze lowering to the floor. "But I can promise you this. If I get a chance to make things right, I will. And I hope all of you will do the same." The staff dispersed, the mood in the store somber but reflective. Oliver lingered by the counter, his thoughts racing as he replayed the events of the day. For the first time, he realized that his actions didn't just affect him. They shaped the experiences of everyone around him, from the staff to the customers, and even the reputation of the brand itself. Meanwhile, outside the store, Melania stepped into her car, her expression calm but thoughtful. She hadn't intended for the day to unfold this way, but she hoped the lesson would resonate. To her, the incident wasn't about power or retribution. It was about change. As the car pulled away, the city lights blurred into a golden haze. Melania's mind drifted to the moments inside the store, the arrogance she had faced, and the humility that had followed. It was a reminder that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, transforming not just individuals, but entire environments. Back inside, Oliver stood alone, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would never look at anyone the same way again. The next morning, the store opened as usual, but the atmosphere felt different. The staff moved more cautiously, exchanging quiet glances as they prepared for the day. Oliver arrived earlier than usual, his posture less confident, and his usual sharp tone replaced with a subdued politeness. The weight of the previous day still clung to him, and he could feel the lingering judgment in the eyes of his team. As the hours passed, customers began to trickle in, their conversations hushed, but buzzing with whispers about the incident. News of Melania Trump's visit had spread, thanks to a few customers who had been present and couldn't resist sharing the story online. By midday, a local news outlet had picked up the story, running the headline, "Luxury Store Manager Faces Backlash After Humiliating High-Profile Guest." The article painted a vivid picture of the confrontation, sparking outrage on social media. Comments flooded in, with people criticizing the manager's behavior and applauding Melania's grace under pressure. By the time Oliver noticed the article, it was too late to contain the fallout. He called the staff into the back room, his face pale and strained. "I know some of you have seen what's circulating online," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I want you to know that I take full responsibility for what happened. I let my arrogance get the better of me, and now I'm facing the consequences." The staff listened, some nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. The young saleswoman from the day before finally spoke up. "It wasn't just about you, Oliver," she said softly. "It was about how we represent this brand and how we treat people. We all saw it happen, and we didn't do enough to stop it." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time, Oliver looked genuinely humbled. "You're right," he admitted. "I've spent too long focusing on appearances instead of what really matters. That's going to change, starting now." Meanwhile, outside the store, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Melania stepped out, once again dressed elegantly, but this time with an air of purpose. She was accompanied by two representatives from the shoe brand's corporate office. As they entered the store, the staff straightened up, their eyes widening in surprise and apprehension. Oliver emerged from the back room, freezing when he saw her. The corporate representatives approached him immediately, their expressions stern. "Oliver," one of them began, "we're here to discuss the events of yesterday." Melania, however, raised a hand, her voice calm but firm. "Before any decisions are made, I want to say something." The room fell silent as she turned to face the staff, her gaze sweeping over them. "What happened yesterday wasn't just about me," she began. "It was about how we treat people, how quick we are to judge based on what we see on the surface." Her words were measured, carrying both authority and empathy. "Every customer who walks into this store deserves respect, whether they're here to buy a pair of shoes or simply to browse. What I experienced was a reflection of something deeper, a mindset that needs to change, not just here, but everywhere." The staff nodded, her words resonating deeply. Even Oliver, who had been bracing himself for harsh criticism, felt the weight of her message. Melania turned to him directly, her tone softening slightly. "Oliver, I'm not here to destroy your career. I believe in second chances. But what matters is what you do with this moment. Will you learn from it, or will you let it define you?" Oliver swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he replied, "I will learn. I promise you that." Melania nodded, then addressed the corporate representatives. "The real test of a brand isn't just its products, it's how it treats people. I hope you'll use this as an opportunity to reflect on the culture you're fostering here." With that, she turned and began to leave, her presence as commanding as it was graceful. The staff watched her go, their admiration for her growing with every step.